Welcome to the June 23rd joint CIP work session between the County Board and the School Board. And I really want to welcome everybody here this afternoon, our school board colleagues, and especially our new superintendent, Dr. Duran. Looking forward to meeting you and having some more time to talk, but welcome to our virtual meeting here. We're glad to have you. Welcome to Arlington.
Thank you.
Yeah, you picked a really quiet, boring time to come, Dr. Duran. I hope you're not too bored.
Not at all. Looking forward to it.
Good. Well, it's great. It's wonderful to have everybody here. We're going to be working through a number of issues. I think both of us are going to have, fairly different CIPs, but it's good to get together. We'll go through the County Board CIP. We'll have a presentation from our staff, and then we'll have and I'll take some, questions and comments that we want to, and then I'll turn it over to Chair Talento to go through the School Board CIP with you and your staff, and she'll take questions and comments, and then we'll see if there's any sort of concluding comments people want to make and wrap it up. So thank you all for coming. And Chair Talento, are there any opening comments you would like to make?
Thank you, Chair Garvey. I just want to thank the County Board for providing us the opportunity for a joint work session. It's always great when the 10 of us can get together to discuss our work. So I'm excited that we were able to do that in virtual world. And I want to welcome everyone here. I know that we always bring our staff and your staff, it's been phenomenal to have our support staff, our staff supporting us, and the support staff are virtual with us and supporting us through these times. So I just want to welcome everyone, and I look forward to tonight's discussion.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of support that goes on. People don't realize how much is going on behind the scenes. People are working pretty hard. So thank you. Well, with that, we've just got about an hour and a half set aside. So I think it's probably a lot to cover. So I believe Mr. Schwartz, our manager, is here with some of his team. And I think I'll turn it over to you and to make the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the County Board and School Board, and Dr. Duran, welcome all. I'm going to start off with the presentation, and then we'll hand it over to Michelle Cowan, our Deputy County Manager, and Maria Meredith, our Head of Department of Management and Finance. And it's supposed to work that Richard Stevenson will be driving the slides here, so he'll share his screen. So give him yeah, okay, there we go. So let's go to the first slide. So focusing on the obvious point about what has been the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our capital improvement plan, you can see that we have experienced some near-term economic and financial impacts. We're not quite sure how long it's going to last. And we also, when we're working with all of our partners, including not just the schools, but transportation agencies in the region and the state and the federal government, they're also in the same situation, wondering what it is the future will hold. So with some of those needs uncertain, you can see that what we have here is we've proposed a one-year CIP for fiscal 21, and we'll get into the details about what bond referenda we're proposing. We're also hopefully going to be stepping back towards our regular process over the next 2 years, so that next year at this time we can consider a medium range CIP that would be between 4 and 6 years long. And I did want to highlight, this is important, something that the county has not done in over 30 years, which is we will have a need for a referenda on an odd numbered year, a year from November. And that is driven by the fact that we have some specific needs associated with transportation and metro. And it's going to be important, given our financial capacity concerns, that we split that out and extend what we normally would do in 2020 another year. And then you can see, hopefully by fiscal 23, we will be back to where we are hopefully more comfortable with a 10-year CIP. The principles that I used in putting together our proposed CIP are to first focus on those projects that are underway, and we have a representative list there. Fire Station 8, Jenny Dean Park, construction on that will get underway towards the end of the summer. We are finishing up the work on the Lubber Run Community Center and also on the Long Bridge Aquatics and Park area. We also have a number of projects where they weren't in the CIP before, but in the interim, they've become important needs. For example, the West Glebe Road Bridge, which is approaching a point where it needs to be replaced. Also, some of the damage we incurred during the storms of last summer. The trail bridges in Carlin Springs and also in Glen Carlin have been destroyed. And also, we have some end-of-life needs with technology systems. I've already mentioned our obligations to Metro, so we have to do that. We're making some adjustments. We've set aside some funds for those kinds of facility changes and additional technology needs we have associated with social distancing and the pandemic. And also, the biggest item we have on our CIP associates with stormwater infrastructure. So over $50 million of the bond referendum is associated with stormwater, and that's consistent with a commitment that I made and the board made as part of the conversation we've had since last July. And then finally, an addition that was made given where we are as a country and as a community with the body-worn camera program, which I'll talk about a little bit on the next slide. This program requires some lead time for us to hire the staff associated with it and also to procure the technology. We're proposing that the board approve funding for a body-worn camera hardware for all our police officers, sheriff's deputies, and our fire marshals, and also funding associated with replacing the current dash in-car cameras, which have reached end of life. And I'll be back to the board probably in July with proposals on how to fund the associated staff for that, which require additional 4 positions in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, 2 additional positions in the police department, and then 1.5 positions to work with the courts on our technology. So rather than belabor that point, I'm at this point going to turn it over to Michelle for the next part of the presentation.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, everyone. So despite the short-term nature of the CIP, as Mark described, it does reflect investments in virtually all areas of the county's infrastructure and facilities as represented by this graphic here. So as you can see, starting at the top of the circle, the county has over $2 million or 2 million square feet of facilities ranging from office buildings to community centers and libraries, and then 24/7 facilities like group homes and fire stations. And you'll see needed investments in those areas in particular. It includes some modest investments in parks, although certainly a decrease from prior years. Technology and public safety, as Mark mentioned, the body-worn camera program, and then a focus certainly as our workforce, or as much of our workforce has gone more mobile with COVID, making sure that we're keeping up on the backbone for that mobile infrastructure and then what our workers need in the field. And then investments in our neighborhood infrastructure, in our water, sewer, and storm systems, and then overall in transportation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how we pay for the CIP, you can see that we're anticipating investment or level of effort of around $275 million in 21. And you can see that from a funding perspective, the largest source of funding for this amount is in previously approved funding. And that's in line with one of the principles I think that Mark laid out earlier, which is our focus is really continuing on existing projects and programs, particularly those that are either under contract or are underway with construction, or where we have an obligation to a funding partner who has funded the project, and we need to make continued progress. The other important note point to note on this slide is that the majority of this previously approved funding, but then the other sources noted in this graphic are legally restricted in use. So as an example, our transportation funding, whether it come from the dedicated commercial real estate tax that by state statute is required to be invested in transportation improvements, or our state and federal sources, whether they be in water and sewer and transportation, are restricted in use to those types of functions. And then we have similar restrictions, as you know, on general obligation bonds that are approved by the voters. A transportation bond can't be spent on a parks project and vice versa. Moving to the next slide, please. wanted to lay out, of course, the highlight of any CIP, which is what the county is proposing for the proposed 2020 bond referenda, which would appear before the voters in November. This, of course, does not reflect the school's request, given that you'll be taking action next week. But let me start from the bottom up and run you through what the manager's proposal that's currently being considered by the board. So it would be a total of almost $92 million at the bottom. The biggest chunk of that is for stormwater, which is the first time that a referenda for stormwater would appear on the ballot. The next largest source then is transportation and metro, totaling almost $30 million. The biggest chunk of that, again, is for our one-year metro obligation. Just under $4 million for Parks and Rec, really focused on what we, with the exception of pedestrian trail park bridges, focused on just repairing a few things that need to be done. And then in the community infrastructure category, around $7.5 million, and that is focused really on facility improvements. And I would say that with the exception of stormwater, all of these amounts are less than in prior years, even with a one-year CIP. Next slide, please. Metro in over the next year, we anticipate an investment of $30 million. We are pleased that this is in line with the prior CIP. As you recall, our last two CIPs, we've had significant, as has the region, significant increases in Metro funding as they work towards state of good repair and dealing with all the investments that they need. This would be funded then by a combination of bond referenda, $20 million, and then we do receive some state transit aid to cover the balance. And then, as Mark noted, this only covers 1 year of funding, which is the need, the rationale and the request and the plan for an off-year referenda cycle in November of 21, so that we would have sufficient funding to fund the next year's round of metro improvements. So stormwater, again, probably the biggest focus of this CIP. As Mark mentioned earlier, we're requesting a $50 million referenda to cover 1 to 2 years worth of projects and improvements. While we have not, of course, put together a 10-year CIP, we've been doing a lot of planning in that area, and our current estimate is that over 10 years, we'd be looking at spending close to $190 million over that period. The program that we are proposing is balanced across several areas of investment in our stormwater system. First of all is $7.8 million in capacity improvements. These would be watershed scale projects and local improvements that would help mitigate high-risk flood areas. As you can see, we've listed out 3 of our watersheds here. The goal is to reduce flooding so that it does not impact building or home integrity or threaten public safety, but combined with private investments, there is a risk-sharing approach that we've been discussing with the community here. The next area of investment is in water quality and $4 million. These are projects that are required to maintain compliance with our MS4 permit. We are on our second round of that permit, and so this would keep us compliant with those requirements. Close to $3 million in maintenance capital investments, and that's just so that we have a state of good repair for our system. One example of that is 4 Mile Run dredging. As I noted, this would require, it's a $50.8 million referenda to be considered by the voters this fall. I would note that because the funding for this is currently via a dedicated tax source, this does not impact the debt capacity for county general government or APS projects. It's the same thing with our water sewer funds. Those are considered in our policies and by the rating agencies as separate and distinct sources. So it does not eat into, if you will, debt capacity available for those general government and APS projects. Next slide, please. Moving on to utilities. This is for our water and sewer infrastructure. Again, maintaining the course and keeping our systems up to date. This is funded via the dedicated water and sewer rate that our customers pay on a quarterly basis. Overall, $16.7 million in regular maintenance capital. We have 525 miles of water mains in the county, 470 miles of sanitary sewer main and distribution system across the county. Much of that was installed in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So just keeping at our regularly scheduled plans to keep that investment going. We also have included $15.6 million for the water pollution control plant. This will begin the process of upgrading and replacing one of our major systems and processes down at the plant that is very aged and needs improvement due to regulatory and best environmental practices. Next slide, then moving, the next few slides are really in the general government area. The next two slides cover transportation. So in transportation in the complete streets area, we're anticipating investing around $117 million. As a reminder, the transportation funding comes from virtually all dedicated funding sources, with the exception of the paving program. So again, our dedicated tax sources or state and federal grant funding partners. Our philosophy, as Mark had mentioned earlier, is to continue with projects that are underway or committed to with those, again, funding partners. And what's of course, interesting about this year, and similar to what we're going through, but the region and the country, many of our funding partners, the regional funding agencies and then the state, have put some of their funding allocation plans on hold, and we'll be revisiting them this fall or next year. And so what we chose to do is not do a complete reset of this program to sort of guess at where those funding sources might end up or how their prioritization processes might change. So we're staying the course, moving forward with the existing projects where we have existing funding, meeting the obligations under our current grant agreements to our partners, and then we'll be revisiting this later in the calendar year and early next calendar year once we have more insight onto the overall revenue projection and where everyone is at. So I will, Richard, if you could go back up. I just wanted a few quick things on, we have not, in our CIP document, we've listed in actually pretty extensive detail all the various projects that are underway. The projects shown on the next two pages are representative. They're certainly not indicative of everything that's in the CIP, but wanted to hit on a few highlights. $11.3 million for paving. This is a intentional 30% decline or reduction in funding for next summer's paving season in recognition of the financial constraints that we are facing. We believe that this will maintain our pavement condition index at a appropriate level if funding isn't further reduced or we don't have any other inflationary or other pressures. So trying to be smart there. As Mark mentioned, $7.6 million for bridge renovation. This is for largely for the West Glebe Road Bridge that has reduced service standards on it now because of its condition. Continuing with improvements along Columbia Pike, and then also in the Crystal City, Pentagon City, and Potomac Yard area in compliance, if you will, with the Crystal City sector plan and then our development plans in that area. The next slide then is on transit, including $3.4 million for art facilities as we design our new O&M facility. It includes investments in Columbia Pike, Ballston, a project that's underway that will really enhance how the metro station works down there. We also have $9 million for continued design and engineering on new station entrances that are largely funded by our state partners. And then including important investments, while small in dollars, but very important for bus stop ADA accessibility. Then moving on, Richard, next slide, to Parks and Recreation. Again, a relatively modest amount compared to prior years. $5.6 million is our plan. $2.5 million for park trail and bridge modernization. This includes replacement of the Glen Carlin Bridge that washed out during the July storm and does provide connectivity to Campbell Elementary School as well as other parts of the county in that neighborhood. It also includes replacement of the second of the three bridges in Lubber Run that do provide connectivity to Barrett and then to Lubber Run Park and ultimately the new community center when it opens. Just under $700,000 for completion of Roslyn Highlands Park. $500,000 for a small parks project related to Tuckahoe Park that we know is used by the Tuckahoe Elementary School for recess and extended day. And then just under $800,000 for replacement of the community field at Virginia Highlands Park that is aging and at risk with some safety issues. I would note this, I wanted to end on synthetic turf because our last CIP had assumed the possible conversion of two fields from grass to synthetic in line with our public spaces master plan. And the discussions that we were having at that point were replacement of the TJ Upper field and then the Kenmore fields, which, as you all know, are both lit. Because our focus has really been on just maintaining what we have and doing those projects that we absolutely must do, we have not included those in this CIP. when we come back next spring and revisit where we're at financially and have conversations, at the staff level with you all about where we're all at and do we want to move forward with these projects, and we could add those into that next shorter term CIP that Mark, discussed. The next slide then is just on facilities, a total of $12 million, $3.5 million for fire station improvements. We have 10 fire stations in the county. 6 or 7 of them do not have appropriate decontamination areas. And as we have added staff in fire in recent years, they also do not have appropriate living and storage facilities and the right gender facilities as well. So that $3.5 million will get those stations up to par. $1 million, just under $2 million for facility maintenance. This is sort of boring stuff, but as you know, very important. And I know you all do the same thing. New roofs, boilers, some electrical upgrades, things like that, that just for our 2 million square feet of facility space are just needed to make every year. And again, this is a reduction from our prior year CIP. And then finally, as Mark noted, we don't know exactly what the future will look like post-COVID. We have included $2 million just to make sure that we're ready for things like, air system changes in our buildings to deal with COVID, or if we need to do additional improvements where we're making larger conference rooms or dealing with elevator and stairwell issues, that type of thing, so that we're ready to go for the workplace of the future, as we can guess at it now. So with that, I will turn it over to Maria.
Thanks, Michelle. So we have about $13.2 million in technology, 10.9 in general technology, and about 2.3 for public safety IT. Some of the highlights of this include $6.3 million for replacement of our end-of-life PCs, network gear, servers, storage, and related maintenance. Just to give you some context, we have about 5,000 PCs, 500 servers, and 2.5 petabytes of storage. And it's important that these items all remain in good working condition, as they're the backbone of all the work we do to serve the community. Next, we had originally planned a $14 million comprehensive replacement of PRISM, which is our enterprise HR financial system, which is now 16 years old, very similar to yours. We are putting a pause on that given our current financial situation until it's more clear, and instead allotting $1.5 million towards a technical upgrade, which will ensure that we remain on a vendor-supported release, which is very important. And then $2.5 million is for a COVID-related technology contingent, which is likely to be used for migrating more and more desktops to laptops to support telework, and whatever other technology needs may arise as a result of our new post-COVID world, or as Michelle said, as what we think the best guess of the new post-COVID world. We also got some of the other highlights are $120,000 for voting machines, for increased early voting and new storage requirements. And then, as Mark mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, $1 million for the body-worn camera program and upgrades to 4 courtrooms, as well as $755,000 for the in-car camera system. Next, thank you. The 10% ceiling for our debt service as a percent of general government expenditures is a best practice for maintaining a AAA rating with the major rating agencies. For context, in the FY19 to 28 CIP, these numbers ranged from 9.4 to 9.9%. It is important to note that no out-year bonds are reflected here beyond those to be approved on the 2020 referenda. As we transition back to a multi-year CIP next year and eventually to a full 10-year CIP, the out-year assumptions on debt and affordability we revised accordingly with the intention of always adhering to the 10% limit, as well as county financial policies for debt. And then our last slide just talks about kind of where we are in timing. We have public hearing coming up next Tuesday night. We have a work session on July 9th. Final board markup to happen the week of July 13th, and then adoption on July 18th.
Yeah. And that
Thank
concludes
you.
that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. All right, board colleagues, county board and school board. If people are able to turn on their cameras, that'll probably help me and hit if you've got a little sign, hit that. But sometimes I just simply go on what I see on the camera, except there are a lot of us right now. So happy to take questions, comments, and maybe I'll start with our school board colleagues because this is more new to you all. So any questions or anything for us? All right, Ms. Cannon, go ahead. Take it away.
None of us ever want to go first, but we all want to go.
Yeah, I know.
I'll get started once.
It's fine. Thanks for starting
Do
us
you want
off.
to just do one, Ms. Garvey, one question at a time? I think I have two.
Well, let's see how long the
Let's
first
see
one
how it
takes.
goes.
How's that?
Okay. Yeah.
It's kind of hard to go back and forth, so I prefer to keep because
Okay.
it's hard. Yep.
Okay. Because I'd like to understand a little bit more about how the stormwater piece is fitting into the whole picture. I think I understood that all the other numbers were all kind of the 1 year, sort of immediate needs, but it sounds like the $50 million referendum is for a longer period of time. And I wonder if you could clarify a little bit how the different pieces of how you anticipate that spending stream to happen.
Sure. I think I'll ask our staff to respond to that.
Yes, so I'm going to ask, I think Demetra McBride is here, and she can lay out a little bit of how what the $50 million is going to do, which is part of actually a larger program over 10 years. So Demetra?
Okay, I've unmuted. Good evening to the county board and to the school board. First time I'm speaking before you. In short, as you're probably not surprised to know, because the school does the same thing in its capital projects, you have a survey and study period, then you go into conceptual design, final design, and then to permitting, procurement, and then to construction. The cadence of those investments per project are you spend the least amount of money in the beginning, and then of course the larger sums are allocated towards the actual construction. We have been working for the past 2.5 years very closely on a number of our key watersheds that pose the largest problems. They pose issues that really call for, as the county manager and the deputy county manager refer to, watershed scale solutions. So right now what you see in FY21 is us finalizing design, going into procurement, and then in 22-23 moving into construction, which is the more cash intensive part of a particular project. In addition to that, we do have some mandatory large-scale projects such as the 4-mile run dredging, which are pursuant to an agreement with the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers, and FEMA in particular, in partnership with the city of Alexandria. That's a brief explanation. If you have any more detailed questions, I'm happy to answer.
You're on mute, Barbara.
I'm on mute. I put myself on mute. So are you, Ms. Garvey. You're on mute too. Okay, I'll ask a follow-up.
It just happens.
And I'll obviously leave it to my county board friends, in terms of thinking about those specific projects. And I guess just from a basic understanding, I guess the idea is you want to do planning and construction and get the whole shebang funded. I'm just curious. I'm just confused why you're funding a long-term project for this versus short-term for everything else. That's what I was trying to understand.
I'm sorry, I should have been more specific. So we're staggering. We've been working on different watersheds, critical watersheds, for differing lengths of time. So we're at different phases. We are ready to move forward with design and construction on one of the larger ones. So what you're seeing is that staggered process. What you do is you really try to keep that flow going concurrently without breaks in between. Because if, for example, you have a pause and you have to wait to construct, there are permits, there are other things that impact design that may require you to go back and now re-spend additional money on design to update it if there's too much of a break between the finalization of design, the procurement, and the construction.
Does that make
So
sense?
in terms
This
of
is
the
a big
timeliness,
problem. It's a big problem.
It's a big problem, therefore.
It's a big problem, and we've got to keep moving on it. So the size of the problem is part of the reason the numbers are large. And as Ms. McBride explained, we've got, we do the same thing, the planning, just as you do, planning and design, which is cheaper, and then construction, and we want to keep moving with that. Does that kind of answer it?
Yes, it actually leads to my larger question, and unless other people stoke my curiosity, this will be my last big question of the work session, which gets to the topic of using our Joint Facilities Advisory Commission. We got feedback from JFAC at our recent school board CIP work session. And I know it's a weird year and we're doing things a little bit differently, but hearing that explanation, knowing that we're all leaving needs on the table right now, but also we have our lists ready because we were planning a more normal CIP. We're going into a CIP season next year, which we don't normally. I think we're in really in a good place to actually really take advantage of our JFAC. To look at what we've left on the table, to look at that leftover debt capacity your slide 15 showed. And I understand you have a lot of needs. I'm not at all saying we want to grab that debt capacity, but I think we have a really good opportunity for our JFAC to really think holistically about what's going on the school side, what's going on the county side, and really provide us some quality advice next year. And I would just like to put that on the table and hope that you all will consider that as we go forward this evening and on into approving our CIPs.
Absolutely. Good point. I don't know if either of our JFAC representatives, I think Mr. DeFranti and Ms. Crystal, it's the two of you who are doing JFAC or have been doing it. I'm not sure. I apologize. It's been a while.
Not have been, unfortunately. I'm stepping in for some truly impossible to fill shoes. And I think we'll be able to reevaluate when we have a new colleague in place in less than a month's time. But Mr. DeFranti and I had been talking and need to follow up on the status of the public facilities plan, a much loved project of our colleague Eric, and need to get a sense of its scope. Was just sending Mr. DeFranti a note about that. I think that's our next step ahead.
Yeah, that's well said. I only would add that I think it's very difficult to adjust to the long-term needs that JFAC has worked on, and certainly the input and insight on the CIP that JFAC, we have some really strong leaders in the commission, and so it is part of the charge to provide some feedback on the CIP. So I am supportive of hearing that, certainly, and I think that's a value add, particularly given that the long term is now 4 months in the world that we're living in right now. So I think it's worth hearing that feedback over the coming weeks, and I appreciate that the chair, vice chair, and the commissioner are willing to offer that, subject to, of course, staying on the right side of open meetings. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only thing I'd add, Madam Chair, before we leave the subject is just that point following up from the conversation about stormwater, and I think those were excellent questions, might be leading us to define facilities awfully broadly. If we're going to talk about infrastructure as well as facilities, if there's any group in the county that would be able to step up and expand their scope in that way, it's probably the JFAC. But I know when we've talked about our public facilities plan to date, I don't know that it's been inclusive of underlying infrastructure like stormwater.
Thank you. Good point. I also think we may want to take a little bit of a look at the world that we're moving into, because it's quite likely, we're looking at post-COVID and what we're going to need. Some of the needs and things may be changing, and obviously for schools as well. I think we tend to fall back into thinking this is an emergency, it's a deal, and we're going to get through it, and then it's going to go back the way it was. But I think when we all understand and know it's not going back to the way it was, and exactly what it's going to be like, we don't know that either. So, but I think there's absolutely an important role for JFAC, and I appreciate you bringing it up, Ms. Cannon, and thank you very much. All right, Ms. Talento.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. I wanted to first thank you all for including the bridges that connect our community to our schools, like Campbell and LeBaron. I know that we got a lot of advocacy for that to be frank, it feels like last year, but it was very possible that it was like November, December. And I only say that because I was putting together some work and I realized that was the school year when in my head it was last year. So I'll just say pre-pandemic, at some point, we received a lot of advocacy for some of those bridges. And I was just curious, we are going to be doing a boundary process in the fall. And I know that some of these things may come up because there's a lot of communities who share that they can walk to school using some of our, park trails and bridges and so forth, and may not need a bus and so forth. We get a lot of our community loves their schools, and we get a lot of that kind of advocacy. So I was curious, do you have timeframes? Because even though we are prioritizing funding both the county and school for 1 year, it doesn't necessarily mean that those projects are going to be completed within that 1 year versus the funding. So I was just curious if, and I know you'll have to prioritize the work. Do you have an idea of when those bridges may be repaired? Are we looking at next spring or the following year?
Yes, thank you. I think we do, because one of them is I think purchased and about to go in, I believe, but I will turn it over to Mr. Schwartz, who's best served to answer that question.
I'm going to ask Michelle to.
Okay, Michelle.
Well, so the good news is that, we did finalize the replacement of the one bridge at Lubber Run, and that is open and operational. So I think that's really great. In terms of the Glen Carlin Bridge is next in the queue. And I don't know that it'll be finished by next spring. These bridges actually, were constructed in a, how will I say it? They were lovely, right? And they were not up to. Right, exactly. They were not up to appropriate engineering standards. Some cases they were done in partnership with the community, which is always great. But given what we're seeing now with flooding and then safety, ADA accessibility, we want to do them right. We want to do them with so that they last as long as they can. It also includes, for instance, in Lubber Run, that the bridge that we're looking at replacing may not go exactly where it was before because of the access and the risk of future, not failure, but jeopardy to the bridge. So we can get back to you with a more specific time frame, but I don't believe it will be by next spring. There's also some specific, when you get into RPAs and other things like that, and there's we had one bridge that we needed to get a federal approval process on, so we have to go through those as well. But we can get back to you. I just don't want you to think that it will be, by spring.
No, I appreciate that, and it's just always good to have that information for when we get asked by our community to be able to say, we know that's coming, but our understanding is it's maybe, following the boundary process, giving the openings or whatever.
Absolutely. Just ask anytime, because, we might not think to be letting you know. And if people are wondering, do ask. If we can tell you, we will.
Right. And that's the great thing about these joint work sessions. We get to have some of these conversations.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. I may have some questions later, but I want to turn my time
I
over.
see Monique O'Grady. There's a Grady.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Chair Garvey.
We can't hear you very well. I don't think you're muted, but it's just really quiet.
Really? Okay. Let's try it this way then.
Try again.
Is that better?
Way better.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. I wanted to ask about how the pandemic might be impacting the length of time that you're working on projects and also the impact on cost, and whether or not it's had an impact to make projects more expensive, lower cost, increase the time, decrease the time, and what you're anticipating for the future.
Thank you. Good question. I don't know. Who should answer that?
I'll start, and then I'm going to ask Michelle or Richard or Karen or anybody to weigh in. We have the most immediate issue we faced is we're trying to finish up construction for the Lubber Run Community Center and also Long Bridge. And there have been not significant challenges, but work crews sometimes have had to stand down given some people will test positive. I'm not aware, and I'm going to turn over to Michelle or Maria or Richard. They'll know that we've gone into the market to try to bid for projects over the last few months to get a sense of what's going on. So I will pass it to them if they have anything to add.
Yeah, it's Michelle again. I think you're right. The most recent projects that we've awarded were largely, they were Parks, Water, and Sewer, and then the transit, that Balsa multimodal product were all bid before the pandemic. And we restarted we started a new program. We're accepting all online bidding. So I think that's helped make things faster as an example. But we should be getting a few new bids in here. I would say at the end of July, I'm thinking about some of our parks projects where we'd have better insight, but we haven't seen anything major yet. But I will also say that we just haven't, so many of our projects that are already under construction or under contract, or we're more in the design phase, in particular on the transportation project. So we don't have any real sense of that yet. That's not, I know, Ms. O'Grady, that's not particularly helpful, but it's just kind of where the data is. In terms of timelines and streamlining things. Like I said, this online bidding process has been really helpful, right? Not having to have people come into the office. I mean, actually, that really helps a lot. I would say that we've been, I think our permitting and engineering staff, the ability for them to work remotely has been really great. So we haven't, I found a few projects that I think were a little held up. They've moved forward a little bit more because folks aren't going to meetings all the time. That makes sense. And that's very anecdotal, but I think there are a few projects I know we were waiting on where like things are slowly but surely coming through. So I'm not seeing any substantial impact yet, if that's helpful. But again, that's really more anecdotal. And I think we'll have more to report towards the end of July when we start seeing some of those bids come in.
Thank you. I see Demetra McBride has got something to add to this, I think. Ms. McBride.
Yes, if I could just quickly add, and the county manager touched upon this, what we're finding, and granted this is anecdotal at this particular time, but we work with a lot closely with our regional jurisdictions and their groups and engineering bureaus. And the biggest impact that people, I think the most consistent impact, not biggest, that people point to is actually whether or not it's an indoor or an outdoor project.
Right.
Obviously, the concerns about COVID are more extreme when you're in a closed area. But it seems as though all of the external work is going through. It's rigorous. They have staffing resources, and we have not noticed any change in the cost factor as yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McBride. Appreciate that information. And then Chair Garvey, I have another question, but I'm happy to wait for another round.
Go for it.
Okay. I did notice that you guys are investing more money in the art transportation facilities. And one of the things I've been really excited about is our collaboration around trying to encourage more students to take art bus to school. And we, of course, had funded that in the current school year. I wanted to know, does that addition of monies in the CIP also indicate additional art bus service and a potential ability for us to continue to grow that program, especially as we face potential challenges with transportation in a COVID world?
Right. You've got a lot of transportation challenges, I think, and we probably do too, and stand ready to help as we can. But I don't know how far our conversations have gone on that. Mark, have you got some?
Yeah, the investments that we're talking about are for facilities for either transfer station for our buses or maintenance facilities. But I'm going to ask Michelle to see if she has anything to add about the specific question you asked, Ms. O'Grady.
Yeah, I believe that, and I would have to go back and confirm this. I believe that for 21, any of our art fleet is really about replacement of existing buses versus expansion of new service. I believe that falls, more of the expansion fell in FY 22 in line with our TDP, sorry to use an acronym, our transit development plan that we update every few years, but we can get back to you on that. So expansion, just the way our plan was not largely until 22. We're operating at about I think 40 to 50% of our current capacity with COVID. We'll see how that opens up with social distancing and all of that, and only rear entry. Our capacity, in fact, is less and could remain so, although we'll see where it goes over the next few months. I do think that it's unfortunate because I think we were making, and I'm sure that if John Chadwick is on the phone, I think we were making some good progress really down, with the, in particular down at the Career Center. And it's just sort of, I think, kills us all that when people are just getting used to that new way of doing things, that it's ended. And I think we're very worried about, our people's fears of coming back to transit, not only for students, but for the workforce. And how do we get through that when it's such an important part of how we've built our community and it's affordable and all those things. So it's one of the things I think that I'm not to use a bad word, but like we're mourning in some ways, right? It's just changed how we've done things. So, but I can get back to you on what those very specific plans are for fleet enhancements, the bus enhancements.
Does that help, Ms. O'Grady?
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Cowan and Chair Garvey. Thank you.
All right, great. So, colleagues, everybody, I'm realizing we're at 10 of 6. We're meant to stop at 6:30. We still have another presentation questions to go. I've got 2 school board members who have not been able to ask questions. can people go past 6:30 at all? Is that a big problem?
Dr. Duran has his last of 6 community town halls at 7, so he'll have to leave us for about 6:40, 6:45 at the latest.
All right.
So he's ready for that. And then we have a closed meeting afterwards, but we have some flexibility on that. So I think.
All right, we're gonna plow forward as fast. We're gonna keep moving as fast as we can. And Mr. Goldstein and Ms. Van Dorn, I don't see hands up. Do either of you have a question? I don't want to pass over you.
Nancy does not have any questions. I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nancy.
Yeah, hi, Libby. Thanks. This is Reed. In the interests of normally shorter work session, I do not have questions at the moment. I'd like to get to our CIP presentation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Is everybody good to move on to the next presentation and keep moving? We good? All right. Thank you very much. Chair Talento, I'm going to turn it over to you and your staff to make your presentation. Thank you. And I'm going to let you handle the questions after this.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Garvey. And I just want to take a moment to really thank our staff and our new superintendent stepping in June 1st to take over the CIP process that was well underway. In a CIP process that had to change fairly rapidly due to our changing economic crisis that we're experiencing with the pandemic. And, we're going to go over a little bit of the timeline, just as you all had to do. Our original intentions with our CIP are very different than what has resulted. And I also want to take an opportunity to thank our Facility Advisories Council and JFAC, our Joint Facilities Advisory Committee, because they were able to provide us recommendations at our last work session based on the new CIP. So our community members really did step up to find ways to either meet or get feedback from their commission and committee members and provide recommendations. So we really appreciated that, and we are considering some of the things that have been shared with us. We are adopting our CIP on Thursday, the 25th, at our school board meeting, so in 2 days. So you'll see some notes in the presentation because we are still finalizing some of that discussion so that we can have our action item ready for Thursday. And so we'll show you really our proposed CIP, then you'll see some of the changes that we have been discussing over the last 3 weeks or so. I know usually we meet a little earlier in this process, but I'm just grateful that we were able to find time to meet in the midst of what's been very difficult, challenging, and hectic times for both of our boards. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our new superintendent, Dr. Dudan, to start us off, and thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Talento, and thank you to all of the county board members for my first opportunity to meet with you virtually. And I know that I have upcoming meetings to meet with you individually, and I look forward to that, to getting to know a little bit about you and you to know a little bit about me. So thank you for pulling up the PowerPoint. We're going to get right into it since we do have time. I want to make sure we get opportunity to answer questions. So just as a quick overview, the school board has held 4 work sessions this spring and really working through a process to develop the CIP that, as Chair Talento said, will be adopted this Thursday. Our CIP process, unlike many things that's been happening, has greatly been impacted by COVID-19. And so through that process, we are working as best we can to align our CIP with the county CIP and the timeline. Our proposal continues to plan for enrollment growth, which many of you know, I'm sure all of you probably do on the county board, that has been a continued occurrence within our school system. And the most recent enrollment projections show that our growth will be surpassing 30,000 students by 2021, 2022. I just want to appreciate all the collaboration and coming in June 1st and really getting into this work, and look forward to that future collaboration with all of you, and really appreciate County Manager Mark Schwartz as well and the collaboration he and I have had, having daily calls now about other topics, but certainly moving forward with the CIP. Next slide, please. Tonight, can someone move the next slide for me? I'm not sure I can do that, so.
Are you're not seeing the slides?
No, it hasn't advanced, Kendra.
Okay,
We're getting there.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. I was trying to control, but I don't have the control, so I'll just share next slide. If no one can do that. Well, the next slide is being brought up. The next slide
I think
is.
we've got it. I think we've got it now. Thank you.
Yeah, that's not the next slide. So if you can go to slide 2. There you go. Thank you. So just our agenda for this evening. Joining me is Assistant Superintendent Leslie Peterson, Assistant Superintendent John Chadwick, and our Executive Director Lisa Stingle. And this evening, we want to just share an overview of our process, our capacity needs, walk you through our CIP, the total costs, the projects and the details, and also a little update and an overview of the planning for next year's CIP, which, as I just said, was really going to be important to address our capacity needs. So next slide, I'm going to ask Lisa Stingle, our Executive Director for Planning and Evaluation, to share with us the process and the timeline of the CIP and an overview of enrollment projections. After that, John Chadwick and Leslie Peterson will also help me present, and then I will close out the presentation. Thank you. Lisa?
Hi, everyone. If you can move forward one slide, that would be great. So just for some background information for anybody who's watching this online and wants to find out more, they can go to our Engage webpage and follow this process back that started in September. Next slide, please. So a quick overview. I've got some detailed slides here, but I'm only going to go through some of the pieces. Back in the fall in September, we published the Arlington Facilities and Student Accommodation Plan, or the AFSAP. We held a work session with our school board, and in that we actually laid out a 10-year CIP plan that was really shaped by our current capacity, our enrollment projections, and a comparison of the two and looking at what we could probably fit into this upcoming CIP. Things have changed a lot since then. We met in December there was a joint county school board meeting, and I think you heard a lot there about the collaboration between the CPHD department and planning and evaluation. And that focus was on the data. And what we actually learned as we were preparing the projections in collaboration with that team this year is that our estimates over time, over the last 3 years, so we developed a process during the community facility study to share the same data that you're using for housing. That feeds into our projections for future student enrollment. And as we found, the last 3 years, those projections for future kindergarten students, that was based on students, women of childbearing age and past birth rates, was actually overestimating. So we came back in December and published our projections with a different view of what's going on. We also made some school moves. The school board adopted some moves in February that actually allowed us to put some neighborhood seats in an area of high growth. The eastern end of the Roslyn-Boston corridor is growing now and actually needs a lot more seats. And so we did some moves in order to facilitate that. Next slide, please. We updated the projections, and actually because of those adjustments and working with your county staff and having our consultant come back in and advise on us, showed that we didn't need as many elementary seats. So we were really focusing on the secondary seats as we went into the closures in March. So we've come back with a different CIP than what we had initially anticipated, and I want to give you a little background now on our projections. Next slide, please. So you may have seen another version of this slide back when we met with you in December. And when you look at this, what it does is it shows the bars are enrollment. So the blue bar was 2019, September 30, 2019 enrollment. The green are our projections. And those pink bars are where we get to those future kindergarten students. Those are kids who are not yet born and in our system today. So those are estimates, and those are all based on assumptions. So we don't have real data on them. All those other kids are someplace closer in our pipeline, and we know more about them. So this is a revised chart that shows that blue line at the top shows our capacity. So when we open the Reed School in 21-22, we actually have about the right capacity for the projected enrollment over the 10-year typical CIP window. Next slide, please. As we started looking more closely at this year's CIP, what the big red flag is we need more middle school seats. As we look further out, we opened Dorothy Ham last year. This last fall, but as we look out, you can see that we are about almost 700 seats short. And further out, where those projections are less reliable because it's based on assumptions, we're still almost 500 seats short of middle school seats compared to what we have today. Next slide, please. And again, at high school, this one has been sort of the one that has changed over this year. So our enrollment has stayed the same. The adjustments on the projections did not really impact our middle or high school. But what's happened here is, you know, that the Career Center expansion project with 800 seats came in over cost. So now as we look further out, we need additional high school seats. Also, Mr. Chadwick will talk about it in a few minutes. Because of some of the changes in the current budget capacity, we've actually pushed back the opening of the Education Center by 1 year. That will add 600 high school seats to the Washington Liberty High School site. And that is now probably going to open in January 2022. And we will be doing some sort of boundary change and adjustments there to balance out Wakefield, which is growing significantly. Next slide, please. So as we've talked about this process this year, and as you'll hear a little bit more in the school board's direction toward the end of this slide, we found the need to take a look back as we talked about 800 high school seats at the Career Center and then 700 possible seats at the middle school. We felt actually if we step back and looked at the total pre-K through 12 enrollment, we get a better picture of sort of the overall seat need. And actually, we don't need 1,500 seats. If you look at this slide here in 24-25, we're about 1,100 seats short. So as we are looking at the next CIP, part of this will shape the decisions that we begin to make. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Peterson.
Thank you, Ms. Tingle. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk you through the school board's proposed 21 CIP as it pertains to funding. On this chart, we basically see the entire school board's proposed 21 CIP with the projects that are being funded on the left-hand side and the funding sources for each of the projects in all of the columns to the right. On the left-hand side, the projects that are in italics are all projects that are underway or are going to be underway based on their being in the previous CIP. Those projects that are not in italics are new to this CIP and are being added for the 21 CIP. And those projects are the planning funds for options to meet the 10-year projected seat needs, design funds to meet those projected seat needs, kitchen refreshes and renovations at ATSP and McKinley to support the program moves that are happening in the fall of 21. Entrance renovations at schools where the main office is not right next to the front entrance. And the Heights building where we have TBD, we are considering 2 scenarios and we will know better what the direction is after the summer 2020 work session, and Mr. Chadwick will talk more about those. And Trade Center bus reparking and repaving and regrading, which is yet to be determined. If you'll notice, there are a number of cells that are highlighted in blue, and those projects are the ones that would be included in our fall 2020 referendum as shown below the larger table where it says 2020 referendum. We would have $54 million in the fall 2020 referendum to fund the projects as listed. Next slide, please. The school board had proposed a CIP, and then there are some changes that are under consideration that are slightly different from what was originally proposed. And we have broken the projects into 3 categories, whether they're providing enrollment capacity, whether they're improvements or other needs, and whether they're planning. And the projects that relate to enrollment capacity are the new elementary school at the Reed site, the renovation of the Education Center, and renovations for Arlington Tech at the Career Center, all of which are projects that were in the previous CIP and are underway. The 4th one is planning and design funds that we need in order to meet, to provide options going forward for how to meet our 10-year projected seat needs across all levels. Because we have a finite amount of money, we need some creative solutions for how we come about providing those seats at the school levels. And one of the considerations that's being added, that may be added to the school board's proposed CIP, is addressing accessibility at the Heights building. Under the improvements for existing facilities, the facility refreshes and kitchen renovations, which I mentioned, which are new. The Heights Field and covered entrance, we are looking at 2 different options, and the school board will make a determination about which option they will go forward with at a later time. We have security entrances, again, for those schools that don't have main offices right next to the front entrance. Major infrastructure projects, you had something similar to this in your CIP, where we are putting funding in to maintain the existing facilities that we have with major projects such as roofs, lighting, windows, those kinds of things. HVAC, one of the biggest ones. Transportation staff facility project, we have our transportation staff facility, which is currently the phase 1 is about to be underway, and that is to provide expanded and remodeled facility for our transportation staff. The original building was provided for a staff that was much, much smaller than the current staff and does not meet all of the ADA requirements at this time. We have included the field conversion to synthetic turf at Kenmore Middle School. We see in this county CIP that is no longer included, that is being delayed. We have retained that in here because we were not aware that that was being delayed at this point. And then for planning, refining the development of the CIP, the direction for the development of the next CIP, trying to make sure that the school board provides the direction to staff to guide us into understanding what we will be doing for the 22 CIP and what that will look like going into the following year's CIP. Next slide. And now I will turn it over to Mr. Chadwick to talk about each of the individual projects.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson, and good evening, everybody. So these are projects that are funded and underway. We have the new elementary school at the Reed site, which, as you know, is under construction. Construction is on track, and we are on schedule to open for 2021-2022. We've suffered a couple of the issues similar to the ones that you've encountered on county projects, with members of teams being testing positive, but we've worked our way through all of those. We haven't had any major delays with delivery of materials, and we are expecting, have every reason to believe, we will open on track. The McKinley Elementary School administration will move there in the summer of 21, while there are renovations going on for ATS at the McKinley site. And this will add 732 seats for elementary schools. Next slide, please. The Education Center project, as you know, we were ready to award the contract for construction right at the time that the COVID epidemic hit. We looked at where we might be on our exposure on that and recommended that we didn't proceed with awarding that contract right away. We are now proceeding towards doing that, and we hope to award that contract in the fall. We now plan to start construction in January and have it complete probably by the end of the year, so that it will be open for students at the beginning of 2022. It is now intended to expand the capacity for Washington Liberty High School, and as Ms. Stengel mentioned, there will be some boundary changes, processes associated with that. So we have done what everybody, or we are going to do what everybody has been asking us to do for a long time, which is to repurpose an office building for school use. It's going to be very exciting to have it done, and I think the building will end up looking even better than it did before. Next slide, please. Reconfiguring at the Career Center for Arlington Tech, and it's always been very complicated to explain what's going on at the Career Center. So there was $18.75 million approved in November 2018 to renovate the Career Center to accommodate the Arlington Tech program for up to 600 seats. So that will provide 600 seats when we're done. All 600 seats will be available for the school year 2021-2022. So that's in August of 2021. But some of those students will be accommodated in relocatable classrooms, because the project has to be coordinated with whatever the expansion project at the Career Center ends up being. So we spent $13 million so far on the various renovations. We have $0.75 million in operating funds that we haven't asked for, and $5 million in bonds remaining to be sold. Next slide, please. So we do need to explain where we are with the planning and design funds. So as was explained by Ms. Stengel, in order to meet our projected need for seats designed within budget constraints and to include creative solutions that may affect planning and seat design additions at all school levels, and as we said, to possibly address accessibility at the heights, we are proposing $13.4 million. $7 million of that is in previously approved bond funds, and sold bond funds. $3.1 million will come from the fall 2020 bond sale. So that was also approved by the voters already. $7.7 million would come from spring 2021 bond sales, and $16.6 million from the spring 2022 bond sale. Next slide, please. I need to explain the planning and design funds because it does seem like a lot of money. In this slide, I want to explain that we have assumed that we would only have a fall 20 bond referendum and not a fall of 21 bond referendum. So this will be changed and teased apart between the 2 years. So in this, the point that we have to make here is that we need to proceed with the seats as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, but we don't know what they're going to be yet. So, there is a gap between the bond referendum in the fall and the bond sales in the spring, or in this case, in the fall. So we generally fund the we fund construction from a different bond sale or bond referendum than we fund design. What we've done here is put together funds that are needed not just to plan, but also potentially to take the projects through construction documents so that they're ready to bid and ready to start construction as soon as possible after that those bond sales are made that will fund construction. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, design funds for capital projects are typically included in the bond referendum prior to the referendum in which construction funds for the projects are included. And that's to optimize debt service so that we don't sell the bonds before we need them. And it's also done to allow us to speed up, to build as quickly as possible. So design funds are included in soft costs. Soft costs typically account for 20% of total project costs, and pre-construction soft costs account for about 80% of total soft costs, or about 12.8% of total project costs. So the $32.4 million in design funds, which is in the 21 CIP, equates to about $217 million of construction costs, or $250 million of total project costs. And would mean that if we do that much construction, we would be able to, if capital projects equaling that amount are approved in the CIPs in 2021, then we are able to proceed with construction as soon as possible. And of course, any unused design funds can and would be applied to future capital projects. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just a detail of the funds that we will be spending on renovate, or we're proposing to spend to renovate the kitchens and to renovate ATS, Key, and McKinley ready for those school moves that are scheduled to occur next in the summer of 21. You'll see here that the refreshes are higher at ATS and Key because, as you know, we recently renovated McKinley. And so that amount is mostly for furniture and equipment that is needed for the programs. The reason we are renovating the kitchens are that those three schools remain pretty much the model that we had when we had a central kitchen and will not serve the populations that we move into the schools and are actually struggling to serve the students that are there now. We did not renovate the kitchen much at all when we did the McKinley project. So that needs now to be done. So the total cost there is $10.25 million for replacing those kitchens. Next slide, please. At the Heights, as you know, the original plan before the firehouse landed on the site was to build a field which would be above a covered parking area, and that parking area was also providing covered pickup and drop off for the programs in the school, particularly the Shriver program. It will also would also intended to provide a covered walk from the intersection of Quinn and 18th Street to the ground level of the building, which is where the main Shriver office is located. No funds for construction are included in the 2021 CIP and the full referendum. If funds for any options are included in the 2022 CIP and full 21 referendum, construction may be completed in time for start of the 2023-24 school year in August of 2023. If there is no FY 2022 CIP and full 2021 referendum, then the option could not be completed before August of 2024. Next slide, please. We are also adding at school board's proposal the security entrances at Taylor, Gunston, Jefferson, Williamsburg, and Wakefield. And let me explain what this is. Best practice is for the main entry vestibule to the school to provide direct access to the main office, so that during the school day, the doors into the school are completely locked and all visitors must enter through the main office, be processed through our visitor management system and proceed forward. This is best practice around the country for entrance to schools. And the 4 schools that you see here, Taylor, Gunston, Jefferson, Williamsburg, and Wakefield, I'm sorry, it's 5, are the ones that are the most expensive to do because the main office is not directly adjacent to the main entrance to the building, and in a couple of cases will have to be relocated completely. So you can see there the cost for each one, and each 5 of those are being included in the CIP. Next slide, please. Major infrastructure projects. As you know, the school board has been very supportive over the years of keeping our buildings up to standard so that we don't run into the deferred maintenance problems that other school divisions run into. As Ms. Peterson said, they are generally spent on major infrastructure replacements like HVAC and roofing, occasionally windows, lighting upgrades, and major projects of that sort. What's being included is $15.4 million. Next slide, please. And this just gives you an idea of some of the projects that we have done using major infrastructure bonds and the projects that are being planned for future infrastructure bonds. So you can see, as you know, recently we've completely replaced the HVAC at Gunston and the HVAC at Randolph. Those were both 2-year projects. We've got some roof coatings going on at Washington Liberty and Kenmore. We have a gymnasium roof replacement. It's a 32-year-old roof at Jefferson. You'll see that there will be, in later years, we will be replacing the remainder of that roof. Randolph is having its roof replaced in the summer of 2021. It's planned, also ATS. And you see here there are the various other HVAC replacements and roof replacements or roof coatings being planned for future years. Next slide, please. Transportation staff facilities being done in 2 steps. As Ms. Peterson said, it's woefully inadequate for the number of staff that we have now. It was designed and built, I don't know when, for a much smaller number of staff. Being done in 2 stages. One is renovation inside the former warehouse building, and the second one is renovation of the office area, or the old break room and office area, to accommodate increased staff. It's also going to provide a new ramp to make the entire trade center accessible, and the completion date for the entire project is scheduled to be around the spring of 2021. Thank you. Next slide. And I'm now going to hand this back to Dr. Duran. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Lisa, for helping provide a lot of good detail and overview. I also want to make sure that it's clear that in the CIP that will be adopted on Thursday, there's also direction on the planning for the next CIP that's coming. And like the county in spring of 2021, the school board will be considering a 4 to 6 year CIP that really is focusing on our enrollment growth. A couple of few points that I want to emphasize and mention about this plan moving forward is that we're going to be focused on how we meet our projected need for seats using updates and projections next fall. We want to make sure that we're considering different options, from whether it's program moves, leasing, or building. We may consider opportunities to create programs or combine school levels, and also making sure that we're addressing the facility needs for the students at the Career Center, as John was providing a little update there, now that the expansion of that is planned over the last year is no longer possible for us moving forward. We also are going to have discussion about the heights, as you heard, this summer. And also the direction on this may have more details added when we ultimately adopt it this Thursday. But I wanted to be clear that there is direction in the adoption occurring about the future CIP. Next slide, please. What's very important, we have challenges of preparing for another CIP, obviously, what we talked about, but the key here is that instruction needs to lead our planning. Our continued enrollment growth needs to be a part of that. And we know that the budget is being reshaped by the economic impact that we're all having with COVID-19 and the loss of revenue. The loss of plans for 800 high school seats as part of our Career Center expansion. As many of you may have heard, the cost for the expansion came in higher than budgeted, which has put the project out of reach at this time. So the school board's direction is helping provide an opportunity for us to consider some changes that really help us to allow our focus on our resources and student success and well-being in driving that conversation. Next slide, please. One more, thank you. Here on this slide, we've identified some general timeframes to address this work, and I want to note that the instructional program pathways and the vision for teaching and learning are going to help shape our priorities that we bring forward in our next CIP to be considered in June of 2021. And I won't read all the dates here, but you can see that we have outlined some work sessions and some community, where the community can engage with us and listen about this. And I want to thank my staff again for providing this great overview and detail, and look forward to future conversations. The next slide, please, will share with us the last step. The action is on Thursday. You can see all of the other actions that occurred up until this point, and we look forward to the ongoing conversations. And I will turn it back to you, Chair Garvey, for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. And
yes, we're actually going to turn it over to Chair Talento to handle this section. Go ahead, Tanya, take it away.
Chair Talento, sorry about that.
That's fine. Thank you. No, it's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Duran, Ms. Stengel, Ms. Peterson, and Mr. Chadwick for the presentation. And County Board colleagues, we'd love to start with you if you have any questions. Anyone ready to go first? Mr. Dorsey?
Thank you, Chair Talento, and thanks to everybody for the presentation. It was quite thorough, so I don't have a lot of program-oriented questions, but just really love to hear your thinking about how you're approaching what is a problem that vexes us all, including as we do projects on the county side, and that's marrying the funds that we put forth for design. And as Mr. Chadwick noted, that has an anticipated overall capital outlay in terms of construction and total project costs. Yet with many of our key signature important necessary projects, we have then been later quite disappointed to the degree that you all have to make major adjustments to what you want to do with the Career Center with moving forward. So I'm just curious as to, are there any thoughts, internal conversations about what we might be able to do from a process and thinking about the design approach to projects to not get into this usual routine of having to either significantly downscale or cancel projects later on? And I don't have a magic answer. I'm just curious as to if you all are working on it.
I will just share that one of the recommendations we received that the school board appears to have a lot of interest in is a Career Center after action process, so that we can have the discussion that you're referring to. But I would like to see if our staff has anything they would like to add to that. And I can tell you a little bit more deeply about I can go a little bit deeper into what was recommended to us by, I think it was our JFAC committee. But Mr. Chadwick, do you have a response?
Well, there were a lot of things that contributed to that, to the project coming in over the budget, and actually there was a major redesign that was done to bring it closer to the budget. I think the thing to remember is that there are amenities at the Career Center that it does not have, that the students that are there now do not have. So we're very mindful that we will need to work through the instructional process to figure out what those are and how we do add them as soon as we can. At the same time, it's going to be really important that we still continue to build within the overall framework that was was approved essentially by the Building Level Planning Committee and the Public Facilities Review Committee, so that over time, what was originally planned can be built at the Career Center if the school board decides that's what needs to happen. But it can be built in smaller phases and smaller, more specific chunks. The reason being that we have very limited space in Arlington, and we need to be very careful that we use whatever we have as efficiently as possible to leave as much flexibility and adaptability for future additions as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick. Mr. Dorsey, does that answer your question?
Gives me further thinking on it, sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick.
Ms. Crystal?
Thank you so much, Chairman Talento. And Dr. Duran, welcome. We are really looking forward to working more closely with you in the weeks to come. Thank you very much for the very extensive presentation. There is just one area where I remain a little unclear, and this probably has more to do with my comprehension than it does your presentation. But I'm hoping we could return to slide 12. I think it was echoed again, maybe on slide 20 or so, about the design money on the referenda. I'm not sure I'm tracking what is being designed with that money that would be placed on the referenda for funding in the next calendar year. So tell me if I'm looking at that correctly. Slide 12. Okay, so this is planning funds to provide options and then design funds to provide options. The 10-year projected seat needs. So have sites been determined? What is the process for determining sites? Do we know that those determinations will be made in time to start using design money on those sites within the next calendar year? Help me understand a little more about what falls into that bucket.
So this is John. Let me start to answer that question, and my colleagues may help me out when I get into trouble. The projections, the enrollment projections that Ms. Stengel shows that we still need around 800 high school seats. We also need middle school seats. And so, and as we stated earlier, we need to add some amenities at the Career Center. So the planning studies will be looking at how might we achieve those. It won't necessarily be a new school anywhere. It's actually unlikely to be a new school. What are alternatives for the 800 seats? And how do we achieve about 500 to 700 seats for middle school? What will go before that, though, of course, is an instructional development process, the instructional program pathways, where we look at are there other ways of achieving these seats? Are they additions to schools? Are they pre-K to 8 models? Are they 6 to 12 models? Are there other ways in which we can achieve these rather than building new schools and rather than putting all the high school seats at the Career Center? I hope that helps.
It does help. If I could ask just one follow-up, I think, let me say this, I've always actually, especially in recent years, admired the fact that the instructional model is driving what you're envisioning for the facilities. I think that's really commendable, and it really speaks to the way that instruction is at the center of all the work that APS does. I guess my question was, if we'd be moving forward with a bond referendum this fall, this would be money that I think here you're anticipating would be allocating starting fall 2020, this calendar year. Is it actually likely that instructional assessment process that will inform decisions about what facilities you need and then will inform the process about where those facilities might go or be renovated to add, is that likely to have moved far enough along the path that you all would actually be spending down funds within the next calendar year?
So let me continue with the discussion. And again, I'll ask my colleagues to rescue me if necessary. If you look at those funds, there was a certain amount of funds, Ms. Peterson will help me out, that we already have. And so those funds will be used through 2021. And the bonds that are sold this fall, the bonds that are approved at referendum this fall will not be sold until next spring. So the rest of the funds won't be available till next spring. And by that time, we will be very close to the school board adopting its next CIP.
Ms. Peterson, I see that you'd like to add something.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Talento. I think the crux of what Ms. Crystal's question is if we don't know what we're designing, how can we have design funds in the referendum?
Nailed it. Thank you.
The answer is that it's really a kind of a proactive thing, because if based on the fact that we were thinking we were going to have a 2020 referendum and then not another referendum until 2022, we were being proactive in putting design funds in this referendum so that if we did do this instructional program pathways and come to some idea of where we wanted to proceed, we didn't have to wait until the 2022 referendum to get approval for design funds that would then take another referendum to get construction funds. So we wanted to put design funds in now so that if we came to a decision about what we wanted to have happen and we needed the funds to start designing right away, we would be in a position to make those seats come about as quickly as possible.
And I see that Ms. Stengel would also like to add something, Ms. Crystal, so.
Yeah, I would just add that the instructional work is going on concurrently. It's really getting on. Some of it started a year ago. Some of it is continuing this summer, and there will be a work session in October with the school board. A tentative one is set up right now to begin to lay out some of those ideas. I know one of the things we're looking at this year is immersion, and immersion has talked about a K-8 program. Could they do something? But if we do that, where do we locate it so that it's also cost effective? If we know middle school teachers, we can't fill a K-8 program with middle school teachers, can we co-locate it someplace? So that work over this year, we'll do some of those projects to get there. I think over time, all of these things will begin to merge. And so as we have sort of which buildings we might be able to do some work on based on some of those old plans, we could look at it with an instructional lens that says, is this where we want to go? I do think one of the things we saw last week that was really important is that prior to this taking place, the pandemic, we had a lot more kids who have actually been taking online distance learning courses. I think we saw, a huge number last week that didn't include Virtual Virginia. And I think I heard today we've had 600 kids take Virtual Virginia courses prior to this pandemic. So, you know, our kids are actually asking for things that we don't provide right now. So there's a lot of work on what the needs of our students are today and in the future that is really taking shape now. And it's looking at what they're asking for and what our profile of a graduate tells us we need to do.
Thank you. So this is really my last question on the topic, and then I'll yield the floor. I guess my question would just be really helpful to hear that the form of the CIP and the proposal for when to go forward for a referenda was based on the assumption, right, that I think was quite a reasonable one to operate off of, that there would not be a calendar 21 bond referendum process. Do you think that you all might reevaluate, knowing now that this is at least the county government side proposal to move forward in 21 with the majority referenda?
You know, Katie, I appreciate the question, and that would obviously be a board decision. I know that our staff can put forth my understanding from very brief conversations, because we haven't had a chance to, I think we received the county manager's CIP late last week, and then we haven't had a chance to really speak as a board and team on this. They could put together a CIP proposal that would split that, but there's been questions already from board members. What does that mean for our ability in 21, right? So we have the debt capacity ratio that we have to watch at NARS, as you can see in this slide, for 21 and 22 is at 9 and 9.27% based on this bond. So if we split it, does it hurt us in the out years on the long-term debt service ratio? Is it easier in the sense of managing our projects and the funding and the debt ratio in doing some now? We don't have the answers to that question, but I know one of my colleagues had asked, what is the effect of not splitting it, and does it open up more bonding next year, or does it not make a difference? So I think we're trying to get some of that work and questions done for tomorrow. So I don't have an answer for you, but I know that they will be looking at that. And I know that one of the questions that came up in our weekly meeting yesterday was realizing that the Kenmore Middle School was being delayed by the county. So then that is another piece that will have to be updated in our scenario.
Right. Yes, the field. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. I see that Mr. DeFerrante has a question.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Talento, and welcome to Dr. Duran. I'm thrilled you're on board. And I did want to just ask about I think this is from Mr. Chadwick, it's about the 3 months, the delay due to planning in the addition to Washington and Liberty. You may have discussed this already. Is there a plan for relocatables that you would come back to us for that short period of time? Or is that down the road to be decided?
That is down the road to be decided, but it's unlikely that we would be filling all of the seats at one time. So it's not as severe as it seems.
Okay. Great, I appreciate it. Thanks, Chair Talento. I appreciate Ms. Crystal's questions. My time frame is a little shorter because of of COVID, essentially. So I'm focused there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeFerrante. And Chair Garvey, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. I see what the time is, and we have our leadership meeting tomorrow. So any questions I can ask then. So I don't want Mr. Duran's got to get to his meeting. You've got to get to yours. So I'm good on questions. Thank you. Happy to you could sum up some comments if you've got, and I'll do that, and we'll get everybody on their way. Thank you.
Thank you. So Dr. Dunn, did you have any closing comments before you have to prepare for your town hall this evening?
Just want to thank everyone again for the opportunity to have our first virtual meeting, and a lot of good information. And I do think that as we move forward, the collaboration obviously was always there, but now as we're working through these challenging times, how do we make our collaboration even tighter? Not just for the CIP, certainly, as we're talking about now, but in all the issues we're working on. And so I want to say to you coming in new that's my commitment and pledge to work closely with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We get to do this again in a smaller group. Thank you. Good luck tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. And I just want to, before I turn it over to Chair Garvey, I just want to thank you all for making time for us. I know that we had to cancel the original one that we were hoping to do the first week in June based on all of the things that have been happening in our country and in community. And so thank you for making time for us this evening, for allowing us to share our information, for the questions, which were great questions, and for allowing us to see how you're working the CIP. It's been great, the communication and collaboration that our teams have had for the month of June to get us here, and we really appreciate that collaboration and effort. So thank you for that.
Well, great. Well, thank you all for coming. These are just very different, turbulent times. I think we're going to be talking about CIPs and school buildings and our buildings and buses and all of that as we continue to work it through. I'm really pleased our staffs are working together. And I expect we're going to even have some conversations about equity, because I think we're all dealing with that as well. So look forward to a lot more. I'm glad we could pull this together. And I look forward to seeing you and Vice Chair O'Grady tomorrow.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Look forward to it. And I hope that everyone has a great evening.
Yep. Everybody take care. Thank you. Stay well.
Thank you all.
Face coverings, wash hands.
Good to see everybody.
Yeah. Good to see you.